It is 2:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's the time zone I'm in right now. Sorry for the poor picture quality. Sorry for the poor lighting. Sorry that you got to look at me. But today we're going to talk about 45 and 33. 33 and 45, two numbers. What's special about these numbers? I don't know, but I can't get them out of my head for some reason. So we'll look at them today. There's a few things I've noticed, but one thing that comes immediately to mind is the great eclipse that we just had a few days ago. It is September 6th, 2017 right now. And back on August 21st, we had the big eclipse that went right across America, and we noticed some interesting things about that. The Great American Eclipse, which was full of references to the number 33, entered the United States on the 45th parallel and exited on the 33rd parallel. So, what do these two numbers have to do with each other? I don't know if we'll have time to get into it all tonight. Well, 45 minus 33 is 12, which is the number of the tribes of Israel as well as the number of apostles. Number 12 many times refers to Israel in prophecy. I'm not going to say that it always has to, but many times it does. And so, for instance, in the Revelation 12 sign, which of course is in chapter 12, you will see that the woman clothed with the sun has a crown of 12 stars on her head. It is thought that Jesus died, was buried, rose again, and ascended into heaven at the age of 33 years of age, 33 years old. This is also the year the church began at Pentecost, the year that he was 33, and there's debate over whether that was actually 33 AD or not, and it may have been, it may not have been, depending on the exact timing. But it's also interesting that it's thought by some that Paul and Barnabas began their first missionary journey in 45 AD. Although this is not for certain, it depends who you ask. 12 years after the church began, by this reckoning, the church took a dramatic turn in active philosophy by adopting the concept of foreign missionary work and actively seeking the Gentiles as well as Jews throughout the world for salvation by Christ. And of course, we know that Jesus told his disciples before he left, as he was just about to leave and go to heaven, that they were to take the gospel all over the world to the Jews and the Gentiles, and not only nearby to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the world. So, if this timeline is correct, then you'll see that 33 AD, or the year that Jesus was 33, he died, rose from the dead, and ascended into heaven. And so that was obviously a very important year. It's interesting because we have a great earthquake at his death and the resurrection of the saints, some of the saints at least that were mentioned in Matthew, who arose out of their graves. And we also see that there was a what appeared to be an eclipse. The sun was blotted out for 3 hours, but that could not have been done the normal way with our moon, because that could not have taken that long. And it is not real clear exactly what caused that, other than to say that the hand of God caused it. But was it an absolute miracle, or was there some physical explanation? I don't know. By the way, you might see me eating a little. I hope you don't mind if I eat in front of you. I made myself a big pot of pottage like Jacob did. And I don't know if you can see this here, but this is just some of my pottage. And it's got some bitter herbs in it, namely collard greens and spinach. And it's got some meatballs and some various other vegetables. And salt, the Bible says salt is good. I believe it. So anyway, if you see me eating something from now and again, hear me talking with my mouth full, that's probably why, but I hope you don't mind. So, what else can we learn about 33 and 45? Well, I've done a study about some of the U.S. presidents that is very interesting. And, well, that's one of the things. Of course, a lot of people, especially older generations, remember that records, those big discs that you used to put on record players or phonographs to listen to music, those came in 3 different speeds: 33, 45, and 78. And of course, 78 is approximately 33 plus 45. So that's an interesting coincidence, if you will. And depending on the exact breakdown, 33 is approximately, it has a ratio with 40. 33 is actually 3/4 of 44. And so it's almost, it's just the two numbers. 45 is just slightly more than third again from 33, if that makes any sense. So it's not a precise, clean ratio, but it is a specific, obviously a specific mathematical ratio nonetheless. Now I have not figured out how to get my computer in this type of recording to actually show you what I'm looking at on the screen. I wish I could. If it's working, then great, but for some reason I don't know how to make it do that. But I'm actually looking at a chart that I made, which I may be able to show you at some point, but not in the video unless I learn how. But there are 4 sets of 2 United States presidents who were related to each other. And I'm going to go through a bunch of information here, and if I tell you anything that wasn't exactly factually accurate, I'm sorry, because I'm hoping that I will be able to keep it as factually accurate as possible. But basically, I made a big chart on Excel where I listed out these 4 sets of 2 presidents, and they all had the same last name as each other. So 2 sets were actually father and son. One was grandfather and grandson, and the other 2, I believe, were some sort of distant relatives, distant cousins or whatever. Chronologically, the first set was John Adams and John Quincy Adams, and they're not the ones who actually got my attention first. But let's talk about them real quick. I made this chart, and I made a lot of different mathematical calculations, and if you're able to look at my chart later, which I hope I'll be able to get you in touch with, we'll find that John Adams was the 2nd president, and his son John Quincy Adams was the 6th president. And so as a ratio, 2 is 1/3 of 6, which is 0.33. 33, there's our number 33. There's a lot of information I put down here. I also found the number 32 coming up a lot on this chart as well. And they were born 32 years apart, 1735 versus 1767. And I'm just trying to make sure I'm not forgetting anything important. But John Adams, which was the 2nd president, he entered office in 1801 and 1797 and ended in 1801, and we're going to find out that several of these presidents either began or ended in 01. And so John Adams began in 1797 and ended in 1801. What does that have to do with 33 or 45? Nothing much. Nothing much at all. However, I'm just pointing it out because there are many other coincidences of which these different groups of presidents also share some numbers. And of course, they're going to share some numbers. After all, presidential elections are only certain years. Every 4 years is an election. But not all presidents were elected. Some entered office because they were the vice president until the president they were with died in office. And that happened with a number of people. And so they didn't all begin in exactly the same year, in a predictable year, I should say. So anyway, having said all that, we're going to be looking at several other things, but I will say one more thing about John Adams. Remember, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the third president, they were both instrumental in bringing us the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And as you know, this was signed, made official on July 4th, 1776, and that's the day that we consider to be the birthday for our nation. Well, that's all well and good. Then John Adams became the second president. Thomas Jefferson became the third president. But what are the odds? What are the chances that these two men would die on the same day, especially not in the same place? I believe both of them, they each died in their own home, or anyway, they were not together at the time. And they died the very same day as each other. Now, for two men who were both famous, or both presidents, and also were both instrumental in the making of the not just the Declaration of Independence, but also the Continental Congress and all the workings that brought about the United States. For two prominent men to both die on the same day of unrelated causes, that would be quite a coincidence. Especially when you consider they were both young men when they were involved in the making of the Declaration of Independence. I don't have Jefferson's stats here in front of me, but both of these men died 50 years after the signing of the Declaration, and both of them died on the same day, which was July 4th, 1826. Let that sink in. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both died the same day as each other on July 4th, 1826, which was 50 years to the day after both of them were president for the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I believe they both signed it. No, Thomas Jefferson wrote it. So anyway, what are those odds? That just goes to show us that God's hand is in these things. I'm sorry, but 50 years after the fact, when they're both old men, I guess you could say they might have each had a longing to sort of make it to that day, and maybe once it happened, you can try to explain this away any way you want, but it's still a coincidence that's just incredible. So, just having said that, when you look at the different things about the different presidents, that's something that always jumps out at me when we're talking about coincidences and numbers. Of course, Jefferson was not one that was in one of my 4 sets of pairs here. But our next set of pairs actually was the Harrisons. William Henry Harrison was the 9th president, and Benjamin Harrison was the 23rd president. And interestingly enough, what if you didn't catch that? That was the 9th president and the 23rd president. And if you know much about the prophecy and everything that I've been following, we are realizing that the most important day we've been talking about for 2017 is September 23rd. And here we have a grandfather and grandson who were the 9th and the 23rd president. Now, the 9th and the 23rd president could have been anybody, and yet it was grandfather and grandson, the Harrison men. So that's very interesting. Now, William Henry Harrison, if I understand correctly, was the president who was in office the shortest amount of time. He was in office only 32 days because he died. He died in office and was only there just over a month. Now, remember, if you were listening, you might have heard me earlier talking about the Adams to say that the number 32 comes up a lot. John Adams was 32 years older than his son, John Quincy Adams. And so here again, I say that William Henry Harrison was in office 32 days. And no, that's not number 33, but it is 32. And it's also interesting that if you add the numbers 9 and 23, which are for the number 9 that William Henry Harrison was the 9th president, and Benjamin Harrison was the 23rd, 9 plus 23 equals 32 also. Also interesting that, let me see here, what was it that I was going to say? It was interesting. Okay. Benjamin Harrison was born in 1833. There's our number 33 again. And you'll find that a lot of these years are important as we look at these different presidents. So the year 1833 is the year that Benjamin Harrison was born. All right. And William Henry Harrison was born in 1773, so they're 60 years apart. And in fact, when William Henry Harrison died in office at the age of 68, young Benjamin, his grandson, would have been 7 or 8 years old at the time. I might, if I'm off by a year on some of these, I have done the research ahead of time. It's just I don't have every single number in front of me, and some of the extrapolations could be off by 1 year, but not the important ones, I hope. So interestingly, they went into office at about the same age. No, I'm sorry. They died at about the same age. Benjamin Harrison died at 67 and William Henry at 68. But of course, that was many years apart. So also, if you'll notice real quick, Benjamin Harrison took office in March of 1889. We might come back to that number later if we get a chance. He entered office March 4th, 1889. All the presidents took their oath on March 4th back in those days. And yes, I know that sounds like an Army command, March 4th. So, having said that, we had, so William Harrison, 32 days in office. Benjamin Harrison, born in 1833. And their presidential numbers added together make 32, and their presidential numbers consecutively are the date of the great sign of Revelation 12, which is 9 and 23. So that if you either I've lost you completely by now, or you are really excited about this. And then So we talked about John Adams and John Quincy Adams. Now let's go to the Roosevelts, who I believe were distant cousins. They were related, but not real closely. Theodore Roosevelt was 26th president, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the 32nd president. Oh my, there is that number 32 again. And we're going to see the number 32 and the number 33 show up a lot in here, as well as the number 45 is going to make some important appearances also. So, Mr. Theodore Roosevelt, the Rough Rider from San Juan Hill and all that, he was born in 1858, died in 1919, and he was the 26th president. And let me see. So he became president unexpectedly in September 14th of 1901. There are 01 again. Remember, John Adams entered the presidency in 1801. Theodore Roosevelt was not expecting to enter the presidency in 1901, but it happened when William McKinley, who was the president, was shot and killed, and Theodore, who was the vice president, became president. So he entered in 1901 to the presidency, and he was reelected after that and ended his presidency in 1909. So he let me see here. Okay, so he didn't have too many really amazing numbers himself, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the 32nd president, born in 1882, this is a man, this is where it really starts to get interesting. He was the 32nd president, and he took office in 1933. There's our 33. And 1933 was a very critical year on several fronts, one of them being that the United States was right in Great Depression, and 1933 was a very critical year of the Great Depression. Mr. Franklin D. Roosevelt was the president to be in office the longest of any U.S. president. He was elected to 4 terms, but he didn't serve all of his 4th term because shortly after he was reelected, he died in office. Now, we could talk about the presidents who were born or died near the 33rd parallel, and I do not have the list of that right now, but Franklin Roosevelt was one of the ones who died near the 33rd parallel, died in Georgia. 33rd parallel, there's our number 33 again. That's where the eclipse came out of South Carolina on August 21st. And if you follow that 33rd parallel all across the United States, it goes through amazingly interesting cities in or very close to the cities of Charleston, Atlanta, I forget if it was Birmingham, one of the cities in Alabama, and on through to Dallas, and it goes through to, I believe it is Phoenix and Los Angeles. And that 33rd parallel cuts through several of the major cities of the United States, and of course a lot of minor towns and things too. And yes, Franklin Delano Roosevelt did die out near the 33rd parallel. Now, also, now remember that Theodore Roosevelt entered office in 1901. Franklin Roosevelt entered in 1933. That is a difference of 32 years. There's our 32 again. Pardon me while I have some of my pottage. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to sell your birthright. Okay, so Franklin Roosevelt and Theodore Roosevelt were 32 years apart in entering office. And as we said, Franklin entered in 1933. When did he end his office? You might be one step ahead of me. 1945. The longest seated president in the United States was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was elected in or I shouldn't say elected, he was inaugurated in 1933 and died in office in 1945. And there you see a time period of 33 to 45, and Franklin Roosevelt's presidency was iconic and very influential in many ways, both for the Great Depression, the establishment of Social Security, and several other social programs in the government, and his entrance, and he was the president who was in office when we entered into war with Japan and Germany. And he, if it had been up to him, the United States probably would have entered sooner than it did. He was a very staunch ally of the United Kingdom. And anyway, when the war was practically won, he died in office, 1945. Of course, he had many health problems anyway, so it really was no huge surprise. He died at the age of 63. 63. And 63. Uh-oh, we're in trouble now. Nothing, I'm just talking to the video. I'll have to see if I can edit that out later. My wife got up in the middle of the night. But basically, so I also took the number of days that he was in office, 4,421 days if I did my math correctly, and divided that by 33, and the result was 133.97. Okay. And there's some other possible interesting numbers, but those were the ones I was going to look at for Franklin Roosevelt. We'll come back to some of his stuff later, but now we go to the fourth set of two related presidents, George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. So George Herbert Walker Bush was the 41st president, and his son, George W. Bush, George Walker Bush, was 84 here. I'm sorry, I'm getting all tied up. He was the 43rd president. If you add those together, it makes 84. They were both born in June. Very interestingly, George W. Bush's birthday was June 6, 1946, or 6/6/46. And his father's birthday was 6/12/1924. They're both still alive, last I heard. And Bush the elder is 93 years old right now. Bush 41 entered the Oval Office in 1989, served through 1993. His son was 2001 through 2009, and that presidency mirrors Theodore Roosevelt's 1901 to 1909. So it's the same two terms of 01 to 09. And of course, we know that Bush 43 was there for the 9/11 attack and all those things. And they were also okay. What was I going to get at here? I don't know if there was anything extra special about these fellows other than that. But this brings me down to another set of two presidents who, again, these were not related, but their last name does start with the same first four letters. We're talking about Harry S. Truman and Donald J. Trump. And what's special about these two? Well, I already told you that these numbers 33 and 45, I just can't get them out of my head. Harry S. Truman was the 33rd president, and Donald J. Trump is the 45th president. How intriguing that their last names both start with Trum. So, Harry Truman was born in 1884, and he died in 1972, day after Christmas. Entered office unexpectedly in 1945. Why did that happen? Well, if you were listening earlier, you would remember that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd president, somewhat unexpectedly died in office, and that was due to illness in 1945 before the end of World War II. And so Harry S. Truman, being the vice president, became the president in April of 1945. I believe that was April 12th, 1945, which was the same day that Franklin Roosevelt died, of course. Harry Truman took over for Roosevelt, and you will see that, and this is interesting, he also died 45 years ago. Harry Truman died 45 years ago. If this is our last year of the United States as we know it, 2017, and I don't know for a fact that it is, but right at this point in time anyway, Harry S. Truman has been dead for 45 years. He was the 33rd president. He was sworn in 1945 upon the death of Franklin Roosevelt. So we got a lot of 45s and 33s going on here, but I'm not done with them. Also, if you add up their presidency numbers 33 and 45, you get 78, which of course, as I said before, is also the third kind of phonograph record speed. But that's not coincidence. That's more mechanical than anything else. And also, it was 133 years ago that Harry S. Truman was born. Okay, so he was born in 1884, and that was 133 years ago. So there's our 33. It's in the form of 133. And Donald Trump, of course, he's the 45th president, born in 46. He was born only, get this, he was born 8 days after George W. Bush. So that's incredible. And he's still alive, thankfully. And he's 71 years old right now. He and George W. Bush are both 71 years old right now. And I believe we could look at some other people who are about the same age. It seems like Bill and Hillary Clinton are about that age also. Now, this is very interesting because another thing about Harry Truman was that he was a Freemason, and he obtained the highest degree of Freemasonry, which was the 33rd degree. And I'll also remind you that he not only he was in office for the end of World War II, But he also was in office for the Berlin Airlift, for the end. Well, the United States was not fighting, but there was a conflict going on in China between communist China and free China, or nationalist China. Nationalist China became what is now Taiwan. In other words, it was more than that, but Taiwan ended up being the only part of China that was still free. And so that whole thing was going on during Truman's presidency, and the Korean conflict began under Truman's presidency. And also, the United Nations was formed, and although, that was in the works from before that, but I'm just telling you that it really came about, formed up for the first time under the time of Harry S. Truman. Also, when you have a look, you also see that he was very instrumental in helping to establish the nation of Israel in 1948. And so you'll find that these numbers are very significant. And so Harry Truman, the 33rd president, Donald Trump, the 45th president, and Donald Trump is very determined to see if he can help to get peace settlement for Israel. Now, it's been tried by others before in the past, I know that. But he seems to be adamant that he and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will actually make this happen. We'll see. We'll see about that. There's somebody else who came to my mind who has some important numbers that match up with some of these other numbers here. And that person, and I know that this is a way to get some people to just quit listening to me altogether, but if you've hung with me this far, you need to realize, remember, Franklin Delano Roosevelt came into office in 1933, and he died in office in April of 1945. So, interestingly enough, he wasn't the only person to go into office in 1933. There was a man named Adolf Hitler who gained power in January of 1933 in Germany and began his 12-year dictatorship, which ended with his death in April of 1945. I say 1945, April of 1945. He died, I guess it must have been like 18 days after Franklin Roosevelt died, something like that. Right around that time, he died April 30th, 1945. So his dictatorship was 1933 to 1945, and of course you know what he did to the Jewish people. And how terrible and tragic that was. Also, remind you, somewhere here we had something else that pertained to that. Let me see. I'm looking for it. What happened to it? Aha. There it is. About a month before Adolf Hitler was born, April 20th. I put the wrong number here, but I happen to know it's April 20th because unfortunately that's also the birth date of one of my many children. although my child is not as old as Hitler would be. But anyway, April 20th. No, I did that wrong all over again. Okay. Second guessed myself, and I should have only single guessed myself. Okay, yes, he was born April 20th, 1889. He died April 30th, 1945. And so I guess he must have been 56 years old when he died. But the point is, Mr. Hitler was born just a month and a half or so after Benjamin Harrison entered office. 1889. March 4th, 1889, Benjamin Harrison entered office. Remember, he was born in 1833, died in 1901, entered office in 1889. So there's your 1889 again. And like we said, Hitler died in 1945, same as Franklin Roosevelt, which of course was when Harry Truman took over, 1945. And of course he came to power in 1933, same as Franklin Roosevelt did. Very interesting stuff here, people. And same as for Harry Truman, same as for Franklin Roosevelt, his death was 72 years ago. So those are just some interesting numbers. As I mentioned before, 33 and 45 have several things that go together. I did find out that the Colt 45 caliber cartridge has it's 45 caliber and it's 33 millimeters long, the case. Not that that has anything to do with anything, I just thought I'd throw that out there. But I think my pottage is getting cold. I may have to try to find some more interesting connections of 33 and 45. If you think of any, please let me know. I probably forgot some really amazing ones that I didn't think to tell you of. But if those come up, we'll deal with them, won't we? Alrighty then. So long for now. You have a good night.